Hello, everybody. Welcome to Symmetry Live. This is Natasha Helfer, and today is June 4th of 2021, which is right at the beginning of Pride Month. So we're all excited to celebrate Pride Month. I know all of us work with many LGBTQ plus people, both in our practice, but we also either identify ourselves in that regard or have family or dear friends who do. And we are just thrilled that we, in general, I believe, are moving more and more towards healthier spaces, both in our country, in our churches, in our schools, and our families, in regards to, the stopping the extreme othering that has happened historically for an entire group of people that has been so damaging. So that is what we're here to discuss. Although we deal with all kinds of mental health issues and all kinds of people from all kinds of backgrounds, we do specialize and most of us come from Mormon backgrounds ourselves. And so actually another way to get to our website, we have symmetrysouls.com, but we also have getmormonhelp.com, because we believe that there are a lot of issues that in particular the Mormon community is struggling with in regards to mental health, relational health, and sexual health. And what was very distressing about what happened this last week was the publication of an article by Tad Callister, who is an emeritus general authority in the LDS Church, that once again, this is not new, once again, happens about every few weeks or months in this community, there is a direct and very poignant attack on, in particular, gay marriage, same-sex marriage, that in regards to this kind of discussion of putting it under the umbrella of family values, meaning that a family can only have values or be of value or be moral if that family looks a certain way and follows certain directions from church leaders, which in this day and age means one man married to one woman. It ignores not only queer members of the church, it also ignores foster families, it ignores adoptive families, it ignores grandparents who raise children. There's so many ways that families show up, single parents, etc., that these kinds of talks really harm, but in particular harm the queer community. And we are very distressed about that because of the statistics and the research that we know as far as the types of implications this has for mental health concerns, suicide, substance abuse concerns, you name it, and also family ostracization, which is a very difficult thing that happens to many members of the church when they don't abide by certain standards of behavior. So this particularly comes at an interesting time because this is a very good example as to why I was recently excommunicated from the LDS Church. So I have been talking about my concerns about these kinds of talks for almost a decade, maybe even over a decade. And so I was accused of clear and deliberate opposition to church leaders and doctrine. And one of the examples mentioned was my support of gay marriage. And so it is interesting to me that as a mental health practitioner, this would be a reason why I would lose my ability to be a member of my own church, because I am willing to call out really at this point what is considered hate speech in this country when you look at the definition of othering an entire population due to something that has to do with their identity, something that they really can't change about themselves, right? So just like we have systemic racism and systemic other systemic cultural issues in the ways that we deal with people, discriminating against the queer community is a form of that type of discrimination that would actually make this qualify as hate speech. So I know that's tough language, that's bold language, and yet it's accurate language. And I think the only way to heal as an LDS community is to really approach this head on and really look at this more more in that critical eye. So that's my introduction. That's what we're here to talk about. I know, Colette, you have to go at the top of the hour. I do want to just quickly introduce Colette Dalton is one of our therapists. She's here in the Salt Lake City area. We'll see people in office and also online. Lindsay Hyde is one of our coaches who is in Colorado. Also, we'll see people online and in person. And Chandra Harris is joining us as one of our newest providers. She's going to be offering therapy in Texas and also some group therapy things, but not probably till this fall. She's got a lot of things happening right now. So can't see her right now, but you'll be excited to be able to see her soon. So she's wonderful. Anyway, yeah, Colette, why don't you start off with some of the thoughts that you wanted to share so we make sure we give you time before you have to go.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to start off by just pointing out the ironic title of this. It says a fence at the top or an ambulance at the bottom. And that references a poem that I really like that talks about the idea of it's better to have a fence at the top than an ambulance down the valley. Like if people keep falling off a cliff, let's build a fence to stop them from falling instead of having an ambulance down at the bottom to take them to a hospital and save them that way. And I think it's so ironic, especially being queer myself, how it often feels like queer members are being pushed off the cliff by the church. And then other people come in and try to help them. It would be so much better if the church had a fence at the top of the cliff instead of an ambulance down the valley for our people who are marginalized and continue getting hurt by hearing this sort of rhetoric. It's like there's so many really, really sad statistics that you can find, especially with it being Pride Month, about the reasons for Pride and how, you know, using transgender people's pronouns can reduce suicide rate by like 50%, and how just simple things of acknowledging people's humanity and their reality reduces suicidality, depression, all sorts of really harsh outcomes. But so for so often and for so many people, church increases that. And so that was one thing that when I just read the title, I was like, are you serious? Like, do you see the irony in that title alone? Please, please, please stop pushing people off the cliff, because we deal with them in our office every day. And of course, we're here to be that ambulance and that love and support. But we don't want to be. We want to work ourselves out of a job. We want people to be healthy and happy wherever they choose to be, instead of continually being beaten down by society around them. So that was my initial thought.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, because that's some of the language that I have used in my frustration is stop. Like, we as mental health professionals are in the trenches of this type of work, and people are bleeding out, people are hurting, people are, you know, needing medical attention, right? Mental health attention. And we're begging for supplies, you know, from the people above that have the power and the ability to offer relief. And instead we're just getting more difficulty, you know, more resistance, more doubling down. And what's so frustrating to me about this is that, you know, the LDS tradition, the restorative tradition, because we're not the, you know, the mainstream Mormon church isn't the only church that comes out of the restorative tradition of, you know, kind of Joseph Smith's initial push towards this religious movement, is that we have in our understanding of theology this idea that we can continue to have a relationship with deity. We can continue to get information from deity. We don't have all the answers. This is kind of what revelation is about. So we have a right to ongoing revelation, right? As far as, and so we have seen in the history of our church, and also I would say in the community of Christ, which also goes back to that tradition, the ability to shift and change over time. Now, community of Christ has done a phenomenal job with this, phenomenal job. They currently have female ordination, gay leaders. They support gay marriage, queer
and
youth.
can I also say, I went to a Community of Christ church here in Salt Lake, and they have a pride flag out in front of their chapel. That felt so incredibly welcoming to me. Just that sign of, I'm going to be accepted because they're practicing this. The rainbow means a safe place for me. Part of the reason why I have rainbows in my office and in my home. And I just wanted to note that it was great.
Yes, right. So that's what's frustrating to me is that, we have in the Book of Mormon, we have all of this language about being very cautious about traditions of our fathers and not falling prey to, old ideas and traditions that are not useful. In the Bible, we have tons of messages about by the fruit you shall know them. And so it's fairly clear to me that the fruit here is rotting on the ground. We have astronomical issues with non-affirming places, just so that people know. Gay and lesbian and bisexual youth and adults have 2 to 3 times the likelihood of mental health symptoms and suicide if they are in non-affirming spaces. Transgender youth and adults are 7 to 10 times the suicide rate of the general population. The fruit is rotting. And yet we consistently see this double down, effect from LDS leaders that are very invested through, I think, decades of having a certain idea that we all know in mental health, it's hard to change your ideas. It's hard to have the humility and the wherewithal to gather new information and shift. That takes a lot of humility, and it's hard for any of us. I mean, that's kind of what we do in therapy, is we help people shift, and that's very hard work. And so we have these leaders who are unwilling to do that and who continue to have our youth and our adult members at much higher risks for things that actually do destroy families and relationships and sexuality. And it just makes me kind of nauseous. So, Lindsay.
Yeah, this frustrates me because I see the ramifications in members of the church. And I wonder if people that write this kind of stuff even begin to realize how dangerous this type of hate speech is to actual people's lives. I was looking at the article, and he says the promotion of moral values, which he equates with, I don't know how, not same-sex marriage. So the promotion of moral values, which is not including same-sex marriage, leads to less contention and hate. First of all, he's saying moral values. Well, how do you know that same-sex married people aren't moral? Are you really saying that? But that leads to less contention and hate. And then you're publishing something like this. Just a few months ago, I saw that transgender people are satanic. How is that promoting less contention and hate? Like, that's just so dangerous, this kind of rhetoric. And so it concerns me that he's willing to publish something like this, that is, do people believe that that's actually not contentious and hateful? Like it is, and it's dangerous to these people. So that's
Oh, exactly. I mean, it's just so it's so challenging to see exactly what they're worried about and exactly what they're trying to enhance is exactly what they're destroying, right? And causing all these issues. And at this point, it's interesting you say, do they just not know? I used to say that quite a bit. I used to say, well, maybe they just don't know. They're not educated about these issues. It's hard for me to give them that pass as a multi-bajillion-dollar industry or organization that they definitely have the resources to get educated if they wanted to. And at this point, I have met many family members of people who have died from suicide or who are currently in a, especially like the Mama Dragons and Papa Dragons, you know, who have met with the apostles and leaders of the church personally and shared their personal stories, not to mention, I'm sure, the droves of letters that they get from people who are advocating for this community in general. So the excuse of ignorance is no longer something I'm willing to offer them. Sandra, do you have any thoughts you'd like to share? Bye, Colette. Thank you. Sorry we couldn't have you on longer.
We'll just have to do some more stuff on Pride for later this month too.
Yes, we will definitely do that.
I think it's important to kind of see our history, because if we want to know where we're going, it's important to see where we've come from. And so something that's been interesting, if we want to take a history on a cultural level of how it's always been, the nuclear family was a drop in the bucket. It was almost like a fluke that happened between 1950 and 1965. And that's it, right? And they were non-existent before 1950, and now they're the minority post 1965. So how did this nuclear family unit between one man, one woman, 2.5 children become this ideal in almost, we've set up a hierarchy for families, or we've created our own caste system, if you will, of putting them in this order of what is the ideal to strive for and makes you somehow better. We need to learn how to live better together. This is such a primitive idea that there's even such a thing as inferior relationships. And so we're not only mitigating and nullifying someone's identity, but all of their loved relationships. And how does a child, this is detrimental to the children. And I think that that's something we can all agree on, that we all care about children, whether you, on both sides, right? So if we want what's best for our children, why would we give a child this type of message that they're sitting in school and somehow they're two moms or two dads, and that their family is somehow inferior? Why would we want to give a child that message? So something that he said, Ted Callister said in his talk, was that families are the sacred cement of all societies. I agree with him with that, but that includes all families. All families are the sacred cement of all societies. So let's treat them as such, Brother Callister. Let's treat all families as sacred, because they are.
Thank you. You're absolutely correct that the history of family is highly complex. You think about tribal communities, for example, many communities didn't even have necessarily marriage. They just would, you know, kind of have mate and have children in the village. The community would raise the children, right? And have that be a very successful way to promote values and ethics and good community living. So this idea that there's only one right way to be a family, first of all, is just completely, quite frankly, asinine and not even realistic when you look at the amounts of families that we have. Secondly, the idea too that gay or lesbian couples would somehow be less likely to have children or have family systems, that's not even true in of itself. Many same-sex marriages have children, adopt children, foster children, surrogate children. And actually the research coming out of marriage and family therapy work shows that at this point, lesbian and gay couples actually do a better job at parenting than heterosexual couples. Now that's not necessarily because gay and lesbian people are just better parents in general, but if you think about how intentional a gay and lesbian couple needs to be to have children at this particular point of history, like they're very committed. They're very committed parents. They're very committed to wanting to have that kind of experience and raise children. And then this idea that the only way that children come into the world is through, you know, like parents who are married. We have tons of kids in the foster care system. We have tons of kids who are adopted. We have tons of kids who need family systems to step in and take care of their needs. And there's so many stories of same-sex marriages stepping up to take care of some of those children that, quite frankly, heterosexual couples are not as good at being, you know, interested in that type of community service and service to children who are very needy in those ways. And again, I feel like, and Colette would have mentioned this point, but there's kind of a colonization aspect of this too, right? Because even what you said, Chandra, about the nuclear family, that's an American nuclear family. I mean, when you think about other countries in the world, other cultures, other races, even how they define family and how family groups are formed and supported are drastically different than the kind of 1950s Leave It to Beaver, you know, fetishized idea of what a family is going to be. And therefore, and the LDS Church is in of itself a colonizing type of entity where they go out into the world saying, we know better than you, and therefore we know how to do family better than you. And that in of itself is incredibly condescending and harmful to cultures and communities that quite frankly, right now, the Mormon religion is a global religion. And so I think that, again, this is very tone deaf and very disrespectful for this ongoing white leader to tell the rest of the world how to do love and family through their perceptions that are highly mixed in with a lot of discrimination and bias that historically we understand and know where it comes from. And I'm letting you know, Brother Callister, it's not from God, it's from your bad traditions. And to humble ourselves as a white male-driven religion is obviously a lot harder than one would think, because they still kind of are very comfortable, even in the movements that we've had of systemic racism, of understanding colonization issues. They continue to put white leaders at the front of global communities talking about very limited understandings of something as complex and as beautiful and as profound as family or family values.
And I actually, you mentioned something about the Americanized nuclear family and how it's put up as this ideal. If we want to look at maybe some of the cons of the nuclear family, there are quite a bit. It's actually very fragile, very brittle, if you will, because what we have when we choose our own families, you know, love who you love, or even post 1950 with the extended family, both of those provide resilience. It provides a buttress for socialization. What it does is, like, if you're mad at one, you know, parent or whatever, you have an auntie to go to, or you have your family that you pick or choose, or you have extended family. And so what ends up happening with a nuclear family is if one of those relationships is severed, the entire unit breaks and there's no buttress, if you will. And then again, the children suffer. You have single parents now. You have the one income. And it actually breaks down. And so what's interesting, where Brother Callister brought up the social programs and how social programs are defeating. Okay, so he brings this up and he ties it with the nuclear family. And I'm thinking, social programs were invented as a result of establishing the nuclear family. It was an instigator, if you will. Like, we didn't need it until we fractured our families and put limits on them and put them in a box. And now we need social programs because we've fragmented our own social families. So now we need social programs. So for him to say, let's cut out social programs and then but keep the nuclear family, well, which one is it, Brother Callister? Are we trying to harm ourselves? Because we need people in our lives. We need people we love. We need people who love us. And the more people that you can have in your life to do that is wonderful and beautiful. And if you don't have that, you're going to have social programs. So I thought that was interesting. Again, it's what Colette was bringing up, was just the irony. It sets us up for failure.
Well, and the one thing that we're not talking about yet that I'm going to talk about now is sex, right? Sex. And this idea, I think sometimes that religious communities have or harbor, that sex isn't important, you know, that somehow if you are righteous enough or worthy enough, you should be able to not necessitate or need something as, you know, vile or as animalistic or as base as sex. And that goes against all of the research that we know. Sexuality, sexual expression, romantic expression, being able to partner with somebody, being able to feel all the feelings, right, that hopefully most of us can relate to when we think about our first crushes or our dates or our first sexual encounters with our spouses. And this heterosexual privilege of heterosexual people who are having sexual relationships to imply that or to request from those who are not heterosexual to just be celibate the rest of their lives, or to not see those aspects of life as necessary to well-being and to mental health and to relational health, is so distressing to me. It's so upsetting. And so, what's the word? Maybe narcissistic, or just self-aggrandizing, and non-compassionate. And, you know, we know also the research, and John Dehlin and other people from Utah State University were involved with quite a bit of research around mixed orientation marriages. They're not the only ones. There's been quite a bit of understanding now that people who are, in a sense, choosing something that goes against their identity and their queerness, or however they're showing up, including asexuality, will have huge ramifications in regards to not only mental health symptoms, but guess what, people? Mental health symptoms, they affect physical health symptoms. So now you have gastrointestinal issues, you've got you know, heart disease, you've got stressors that can even affect things like diabetes, and all kinds of interplay and quality of life for people, where we are expecting them to ignore an entire aspect of their human experience for some, you know, idea that we might have about the afterlife, which, quite frankly, anybody who thinks that they have a great idea about that, I think is dealing with some narcissism in of themselves, right? I mean, that's you're taking a huge risk that you think you know enough about something that's going to come after this life to ignore what we very much know is happening in this life, and that this is having, you know, huge implications for straight partners of gay and lesbian spouses, for gay and lesbian spouses themselves, and of course, like you've mentioned before, the children and the teens who are themselves going through sexual developmental spaces that are very important to start placing the stepping stones right into having the skill set and the ability to have good relational and sexual health as adults. And we are completely stopping that developmental process from happening and not allowing it in ways that then cause huge implications for these family systems that then are at higher risk for divorce, are at higher risk for mental health, suicide, et cetera. And so I feel like at best, I can say this is irresponsible. At worst, I can say this is like criminal almost. You know, this is like really positing information to a vulnerable population that is taught to believe and follow you. Otherwise, you face things like I had to face, where you're ousted if you have a critical voice against some of these things. And it's setting families and individuals up for a lot of distress and unnecessary heartache. I think, was it Colette that said, we'd love to be out of a job? Quite frankly, we're not going to be out of a job. Even if we just had to deal with basic anxiety and depression that's due to like genetic and biological factors, we would all have a job, because there's plenty of that to go around. What makes it so distressing to me is why add more problems that are unnecessary to already how difficult life is, you know, just by existing. I could go on. Lindsay?
I just wanted to circle back to the children once again. The society and culture we live in right now is definitely much more accepting and open to LGBTQ people. I live in a house of 7 teenagers, and we've got every pronoun under the book, and like, you know, everyone's exploring different things, and that's awesome. And so I worry again about these active, believing Mormon teenagers who are seeing that type of society and growing up in that openness and exploratory world outside of church, and then going to church and hearing this. Like, it terrifies me. It's like literally so scary to me, because these kids, you know, they're hearing a much different message outside of the church. And then as you're saying, they're taught to believe without any doubt or question these leaders that are telling them that that is absolutely horrible. And they have no moral values. Oh, that just bothers me. It's just dangerous. It's scary.
Yeah, no, I agree. And here's what's so sad. I mean, because excommunicated or not, I still consider myself Mormon. I still consider this my church. And it is so distressing to me to be part of a church community where the healthy people are actually leaving, and correctly so. So the healthy teens, the teens that are fairly differentiated, the teens that know how to eye roll at the older people, like, oh my gosh, here they go again, they're out and they're leaving us. And rightly so at this point, you know, between feminist issues and queer issues, and Jana Reese's research goes into this, you know, in some of the books that she's written about kind of the trends in regards to people in the Mormon church. The healthy people are out because it is an unhealthy space, and they can tell it is, especially if they themselves identify as queer in any one of those alphabet acronyms that we use. Where I'm really concerned is the kids who take it super seriously, who are living in that dichotomy of, you know, hearing on the one hand, I'm a child of God and I am of worth. On the other hand, hearing, but the way you're showing up as a child of God is actually, you know, like perverse and incorrect and vile and destroys families. And for a young kid who doesn't have a fully developed brain, because we now know that that doesn't happen really till our mid-20s, to have to deal with that incongruence of who they are as a person, yeah, of course we have higher rates of suicide. Of course we do. And that to me, and you know, and also kids, even the kids who can roll their eyes and say, well, you know, once I'm 18, I'm out of here. That doesn't mean that they're not impacted by the 6 to 7 years that they're hearing this kind of hate speech, and that it doesn't get internalized in some ways in regards to internalized shame, which then again goes on to affect their ability to thrive and be in relationships in healthy ways, right? So if you feel badly about yourself, you're usually willing to put up with bad behavior in relationships, right? Or bad ethics in regards to how relationships work. And many of these kids are also vulnerable for sexual assault and sexual crimes and things of that nature, because they don't feel of worth enough to advocate or to expect good things in their lives, right? So what Ted Callister is really doing is a self-fulfilling, it's a community fulfilling prophecy. As long as we believe that this will destroy families, it actually will. Not because it actually does, but because we treat it as such, and then the families are destroyed under that narrative. So shame on you, Brother Callister, and others who continue this harmful rhetoric that is hurting people in my client's chair, people of my own family. I too, like you, Lindsay, have people in my family, my direct family, who identify as queer in some way. And Chandra, I know that you've been affected by this very personally as well. So that's this has to change, and I really believe what's interesting too about the Pew poll, is that right? The National Pew poll or whatever it is that most LDS members, most mainstream Mormon members at this point, are actually not against gay marriage. I think it's like, I want to say 55 or 60% of LDS members actually support gay marriage, which is interesting when Brother Christofferson, several years ago said, well, you can support gay marriage and still be a member of the church, just don't be public about it. Well, that is not healthy. That is not healthy space for our church to be in. Yes, support things in secret. No, that's not either doctrinal nor mental health, centric in regards to what's healthy for a community. So I think we all are calling on the leaders of this church to humble themselves, to educate themselves, to search out for trauma-informed and LGBTQ plus affirming resources that are more than willing to come in and train people, either for free or at a cost. And I actually recommend that the church pay big time for the best experts to come in and educate them on how this can be turned around. We have the tools, doctrinal tools to do that. And I think that's what we're calling for, because we, the three of us and the rest of the team at Symmetry and all the people who signed the mental health letter during my excommunication process, we are tired of being in the trenches and picking up the wounded from ongoing talks like this. We're not the only church that has these beliefs, like the Catholic Church, for example. They also see homosexuality as a sin. You can see the Pope trying to smooth things over, but when it comes right down to it, he does say, no, yes, we still think it's a sin. However, the one difference there is that we don't have a talk from the Pope every 2 to 3 months pointing out the same idea over and over and over again, so that the youth and the adults who are dealing with these issues have to consistently be reminded that in their church faith community, they don't belong. And we are doing them. And I don't understand. I mean, if you don't want to change your ways, okay, but stop talking about it all the freaking time then. What's that about? Anybody want to talk a little bit about, as far as, so we've been complaining a lot, what can we offer? What might be, like, if you are struggling, if you're a Mormon family and have an LGBTQ plus youth, if you are an LGBTQ plus teen in a Mormon family that happens to be listening to this and doesn't know where to get resources or help, if you are an adult who realizes you're dealing with internalized shame, or in a mixed orientation marriage yourself, and struggling with the value, of course, of the love and the commitment you have for your relationships and also your own individual needs and desires and identity, whether you're the straight or gay, lesbian spouse. What are some things that people like us or resources like us can offer, and what's the benefit of it?
I have a couple different clients that are mixed orientation marriages. And I think that talking through things with a qualified professional can definitely be helpful. I think there's a lot to unpack in terms of what you have been taught your whole life versus what you actually believe. I think that's really important to get clear on. And that's something that I encourage people to do. I encourage all people in any situation to think deeply about what they actually believe about these topics. And rather than just kind of following things like this talk that just show up out of nowhere, like, what do you actually believe? And I would even say, what did Christ actually teach? I don't personally remember anything he ever said about same-sex marriage or same-sex relationships at all. Like, all I ever remember him saying is to love one another and to love each other. So I just encourage everyone to, get back to the basics and look at what Christ taught and try to follow that, if, and follow what resonates as true to you and what you believe really carefully. And don't be afraid to be a loud supporter of what you believe, and not like, I I don't think we should be quiet. I just don't think that you're right. It's not healthy. And to me, that's a little suspect and a little weird. Like, you can believe this, just don't tell anyone. I don't know. That feels off to me.
I think Natasha brought up a great point about the self-fulfilling prophecy of how this is hurting same-sex marriage families, because we see, you know, the correlation versus the cause and effect is the shame is what is destroying these precious families mentally and physically, and not actually being gay is not the thing doing it. And so Brene Brown says that shame, she says if you put it in a petri dish, how it can grow is secrecy, silence, and judgment. And so what we're doing in the church is, sure, be gay, but don't talk about it, and don't act on it, and be celibate, and let's judge you in our worthiness interviews. So that just breeds this shame, and that's what's hurting these families, not being gay in of itself. And so in terms of what's healthy and what can be helpful is to take that away. How can we destroy shame? Well, we take away the secrecy, silence, and judgment. And that can be in the form of putting a flag in front of your window. This isn't a matter of stay in the church or stay out of the church. This is just being who you are and showing up in your spaces, whether that's in or out of the church, right? And you know, people, you're in the ward with people, not the high, you know, first presidency, and see what that does for you. You might be surprised because, like Natasha said, probably more the majority of members are supportive of these families, and they want to love. They actually want to support and love. And they will say, oh, what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to love. But how are they going to do that? That's where we come in. That's where you come in. That's where you say how they can help. And I'm a humanist, so I give people the benefit of the doubt all the time, but you might be surprised that they'll follow through because they want to love. They want to help because they want to follow the teachings of Jesus. And actually, this goes along with our theology in Mormonism that we believe in the fundamental family, in the family. We believe we're family central. That is a huge part of Mormonism. And how do we become from our family central to being family friendly? You know, they're not synonymous. And I had one other thought. Now I can't remember. And our theology that marriage keeps you healthy. Marriage is of God. And we scoff at other maybe religions in terms of being a nun or being celibate. And we're like, no, that's not of God. And yet here we are proclaiming that that's what you should do. It makes zero sense. So it's actually not even in alignment with our own theology. If you know, just show up in your spaces and take away that secrecy, silence, and judgment. And a lot of businesses are now promoting heavier and more outward about it. I just went to Target and picked up my kids call it an ugly pride shirt, but ugly or not, it's beautiful to me.
I have one more thing in terms of othering. If people are dealing with like internalized shame or homophobia in some way, get to know people, like learn, you know, about people and get to know their stories. And I think, you know, it's really hard to hate someone that you know and you know their story. It's easy to think you hate a group of people when you don't know them, but when you get to know people. So if you don't know gay people, then get to know some and, you know, reach out. I talk all the time about my experience at the Pride Parade 2 years ago, because it was like life-changing for me to see so much love. Like, you cannot go to a Pride event without feeling like this outpouring of love like I've never, ever seen anywhere in my entire life. So that's my thing. Go meet people and get to know them at, you know, who they are. And it's really hard to hate people when you know them.
Yeah, I agree. So I guess I'll close up with two thoughts. I think that there are those of us who are still active and members of the Mormon Church or other church communities where this may be an issue. My strong belief is that it would only take 2 to 3 people in a Sunday school setting or a Relief Society or priesthood setting to agree or back each other up when one person is brave enough to raise their hand and say, hey, I'm uncomfortable with this talk, or hey, I'm not sure I totally agree with Brother Callister, right? Or hey, this isn't the experience in our family, because we do have, a nephew who just got married to his husband, right? Or we have, my daughter, is bisexual, or, when we actually talk about things, because right now, for whatever reasons, in the LDS church, the more conservative voice is the only voice that's welcome in these kind of public settings. But I believe that it would only take 2 to 3 people. If only one person raises their hand and nobody backs them up, then that person is like, the tension in the room, and then the ostracization that person, gets. I mean, I've been in that position. I've been the person raising my hand, so I know what that feels like. But if you would have another person raise their hand right after that and go, you know what, I agree, that's my experience too, or I'm concerned as well. Now we could have that shift of moving things into the types of conversations that I think, like you're both saying, most people want to be having in the LDS mainstream experience, where we could be more honest and open about the things that we're struggling with in regards to, these messages coming from top leadership, and yet our lived experiences with our own youth, our own family, and our own communities, and even our own workspaces. Because you're right. Like, workspaces are no longer, you can get fired for this kind of stuff. If Ted Callister got up and said this at any type of CEO meeting or whatever, he'd be out. I mean, this is no longer accepted. And even BYU is facing some really challenging, I think, uphill battles in continuing to be able to get federal funds or anything like that, because you cannot be a discriminating force in this country and be supported. You have the freedom to be discriminating, but you do not have the right to be supported in your discrimination. And so I think that, people really need to think about that, and to use our Mormon teachings. Like, I remember several years ago in the Relief Society, it was a big, stand for what you believe, stand something. There was some mantra about standing for what you think is true. Well, but only when it's supported by a certain leader. Like, what about truth that we know and goes against our own faith community? And then this intersection, I think too, that I'm inviting people to think about is, if you need to leave a faith community because it is unhealthy for you, I'm 100% supportive of that, especially for our queer people. At the same time, many people don't want to leave. They, again, in my excommunication, I was attacked for several things that I believe, but that wasn't the entirety of my Mormon ideas or my Mormon faith or my testimony per se, right? It was like, yeah, I disagree with you guys on these 3 or 4 things, but we probably agree on these other 500 things, right? But I'm ousted because of these 4 things that I'm using my Mormon teachings to stand up to and say, this isn't okay. This isn't helpful. This isn't, in my professional and personal experience, okay. So there are lots of people who do want to stay and who who do deem their testimonies very sacred, who love their experience worshiping, on Sundays. And so how do we who have privilege help those people feel welcome, right? So how do you wear a rainbow pride pin or a rainbow tie, or give a sense that, hey, there's somebody in this ward house that is safe. And there's lots of people doing that now. What if 4 people did that in every ward? That would really shift. It's, again, instead of the one person who always does it, right? So, and I think if you're an ecclesiastical leader, I was just approached by a Relief Society president that I didn't even know, because she recognized me, and she's like, I just got called to Relief Society president. I followed all your stuff. I'm heartbroken for what you went through. Here's a Relief Society president who agrees with me on some issues, maybe not all issues, but on some issues. And yet she's in a position of power and influence in her ward community. How does she support or use that position to help? And how do people support her instead of ostracizing her if she speaks up in a way that makes people feel uncomfortable, right? These are the things I'd like Mormons to be thinking about. how do we do that grassroots advocacy so that eventually the church will change like it has before on many topics? This whole idea of doctrine and doctrinal, this is the doctrine. Come on. We've been shifting in doctrine since day one. Because how I talk about is doctrinal understandings. It's our best guess. Maybe doctrine in a sense maybe doesn't change, but we don't totally get it and we all interpret it differently. So come on, go ahead.
So Natasha, I think that that's such an important point, that we are a living church and we have living doctrine, and we believe in continuing revelation. And so if that's something we really believe in, then we're going to, when they were talking, about the race and the priesthood, and they said, well, why didn't we change it back then? And our answer was the people weren't ready. And so if the people weren't ready, where's our place in this? It's to get the people ready and to prepare everyone for what's coming. And the reason I bring that up is because we've done that with race and the priesthood. We did that with birth control. We've done that time and time again, just because the people changed first. And the revelation came from the bottom up. And out east, where I grew up, my family talks to me about their attendance at church. And it looks very different than the Idaho, Utah Mormon, mainstream Mormonism. And they are very affirming for LGBT everybody's. So whenever a youth goes up at the podium and the speaker, and they come out, because this is a very special occasion that they do it up on the pulpit. And anytime that happens, after sacrament is over, the entire congregation lines up into a line, and every single person of the board gives that youth a hug. And this is our doctrine. This is the Jesus Christ doctrine, to love everybody. And they feel welcome. They're allowed to hold a calling. They come in with their partner and they sit in the pews holding hands with that person. And so it's happening already. So it just needs to and we always know out east is how many years behind, I don't know, or ahead, right? 10, 20 years ahead, right? So it's coming. It's just a matter of time. And Are you going to be on the right side of history or not?
Yeah. Yeah. And even in California, sometimes that's also the case, so both coasts tend to be a little bit more progressive and able to make those shifts more readily than the rest of the middle country per se. But yeah, so anyway, that was my one rant about what you can do if you're not maybe directly affected, but you're active and you have privilege, and how you stand up and voice, because it's unfair to always leave the voicing to the people who are being oppressed. And actually that's too much of a burden sometimes for many people. They're already struggling. And also the youth don't always know that they have a voice or even understand their own voice. And so to, give them a sense that, hey, there's people here. But the second point I wanted to make is if you have lived through some level of the shaming process and you're affected directly, whether you're you're LGBTQ plus yourself or a family member or a marital partner, et cetera, therapy and coaching services can be very useful. Like Lindsay said, unpacking, being able to talk in a space of non-judgment where, and remember too, that a good professional is not going to tell you to leave or to stay in a church, right? So, right, if you're meeting with a secular therapist who's like, well, it looks like your church is super harmful, so you should leave it, that's probably inappropriate. And it's also inappropriate for you to see maybe an LDS therapist who's like, oh, well, but the gospel is true. Why don't you pray more about it and read your scriptures? So those are not good professionals. You want to be able to sit with somebody who will be able to listen, who will be able to validate, who will be able to offer a variety of choices for you to think about, and to honor your choice if you want to stay or go, or, maybe take a sabbatical or be somewhere in between. Because then that gives you the agency and the freedom and the healing power over your own life journey. But it's very helpful to have a witness to that and to have a professional who's trained in those regards, who can offer some of those insights, or, have you thought about it this way? Have you, maybe help you set boundaries with people who are acting inappropriately in your life? What would that look like? Role model that. Help you understand what internalized shame looks like. What is your inner dialogue doing? Sometimes that's very hard to do just from the space of yourself, right? even me as a therapist needs to do that with a therapist, because even though I know all this intellectually, it doesn't mean that I know how to do it for myself, right? So I go to see a therapist or a coach so that they can help kind of give me those aha moments, or, oh, I hadn't thought about it that way, or even just a witness to a thought. If I have a thought and somebody says, you know what, that actually rings pretty correct. Oh, now there's two things that are telling me I'm kind of on the right path. That's very powerful to the healing journey. And a lot of what we do at Symmetry Solutions, and of course, there's tons of other places you can go and get some of these resources. If you're a teen, that, you know, it's harder because a lot of times places will need parental consent, right, for you to be seen. But this is why it's important to not all places, not all states require, like California, I think you can be as young as 14 to request your own mental health services with or without parental consent. I'd have to look at every state. Every state is a little bit different. There are online support groups, although be careful that they're credible, you know, and that they come from resources like the Trevor Project, or, you know, there's all kinds of really well-known resources versus just meeting with maybe teens who don't really know what they're talking about and can actually be more harmful than helpful sometimes. And there's the pride centers. Like most communities now have pride centers where you can go and walk in and talk to somebody. And it's confidential, and you don't have to worry about your parents finding out if you really are struggling in a family system that is non-affirming to your reality and your orientation and your identity. So that's what I have to say about how services can be helpful in these situations, and deserved. Nobody deserves to go through this alone. Everybody deserves support and help and affirmation and love, like Chandra has said many times. So anyway, I'm sad that once again, we're having to have this conversation in this setting of, you know, kind of really harmful and hateful speech being widely dispersed from a person that has a lot of power and is wielding that power unrighteously and harmfully. And that's very sad to me. So I hope that we are all motivated by our sadness and anger towards healthier spaces. Any final thoughts from either one of you?
I just want to say, I just want to put out that you are loved. I mean, it could sound very patronizing, but my point in saying that is that there are people out there. And so if you don't have them in your life, find them, because they exist. They're everywhere. You just that they're there for you, but just find them.
Sorry, I muted myself. I mean, that's the Trevor Project's main theme, right? Is it gets better. And that can be really hard to remember when you're in the trenches of loneliness, sadness, desperation, hopelessness, feeling like you're an awful person, feeling like there's something wrong with you or broken. And yeah, those of us who know better, we do know that it's maybe feels a little trite to tell you, you are not broken, but oh my gosh, like you are not. You're not broken. The systems that you live within are broken and have made you feel broken. And there's plenty of people who will help you get to a better place. We need you to hang in there until you can get there. It's more hope for you. All right, much love, especially to our lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, asexual, intersexual, aromantic. There's a wonderful ABC video I'll have to put in the comment thread. But all of you who identify as queer or in any way, shape, or form, we understand that the road has been hard, and the road has been unfair and detrimental. And we want to be part of the healing experience. All right, love you both. We'll see you all next time. Everybody go get a pride flag. Celebrate June. Take care. Bye-bye.